The shriek echoed across the lake like a siren breaking Sunday peace. Karen was standing at the end of my dock, red-faced and wild-eyed, yanking my no trespassing sign straight out of the ground like she'd just claimed the beach at Normandy. "This belongs to the community now," she screeched, throwing the sign into the water like a javelin. I just blinked, sitting in my Adirondack chair with an iced tea in one hand and a fishing rod in the other, watching her melt down like an overheated firework. The funny part was she didn't even realize there were 3 high-definition security cameras catching every second of her tantrum in glorious 4K. The sad part was she genuinely believed she was in the right. That moment, right there, was when I knew I wasn't dealing with an annoying neighbor. I was dealing with a full-blown HOA hurricane with a clipboard and an entitlement complex. 3 months ago, I bought the lakeside property to escape the madness of city living. After 20 years of grinding away in software development and too many sleepless nights in front of a blue-lit screen, I cashed out and decided I wanted peace. Serenity. A place where I could fish in the mornings, kayak in the evenings, and not have to argue with anyone about whether my grass was half an inch too long. The dock was a bonus. The previous owner had built it legally, with permits going back a decade, and it had become my favorite place to unwind. I'd spent the first 2 weeks staining the wood, installing solar lights, and adding a motion sensor camera system, not because I expected drama, but because I knew peace always attracts chaos. And boy was I right. Karen first introduced herself the day after I moved in. I was unloading a kayak from my truck when she marched over like a manager on a mission. She wore oversized sunglasses on her head, a pastel power walk outfit, and had the perpetual frown of someone who treated neighborhood bylaws like scripture. She didn't say hello. She didn't welcome me. Her first words were, "You'll need to remove that green trim. It's not HOA approved." I smiled politely and said I wasn't part of the HOA. Her lips pursed so tight I thought she might swallow her own complaint. She huffed and said that dock sits on community water. "We'll talk later." And with that, she vanished as fast as she appeared. I didn't think much of it until the second week. That's when the flyer showed up taped to my mailbox. An elaborate pink and gold invite to the Sweet 16 of 1 Tiffany Mayfield, complete with glitter stickers, a schedule, and a small map showing my dock labeled as Sunset Reception Zone. I thought it was a mistake. Surely this had been intended for someone else. I walked over to Karen's house that evening, flyer in hand, and politely asked if there'd been an error. Her response was a fake smile, wide and plastic. "Oh no, it's correct. Your dock is perfect for the reception. Don't worry. We'll clean up after ourselves." I blinked. "You're planning to host a party on my private dock?" I asked. She waved dismissively. "It's community property. Technically the water belongs to all of us and the dock touches it, so, you know." I didn't know. In fact, I was pretty sure that wasn't how property law worked. I told her as much. Calmly. Respectfully. And she lost it. That was the first meltdown. She started shouting about selfishness and "what kind of neighbor are you?" and "this is why communities fall apart." I stood there calmly as she ranted on my front porch, one foot still on her turf so she could feel legally safe. I let her rant for a full 5 minutes before I calmly said, "I have cameras on the dock, and it's not happening. Period." She stormed off shouting that I'd regret this. At that point I thought maybe she was bluffing. Or maybe her ego would settle once the party got moved. But that's not what happened. 2 days later, I noticed lawn chairs placed at the end of the dock. Just there. Like someone had already started setting up. A stack of balloons sat tied to the edge rail. I reviewed the camera footage. Sometime after midnight, Karen herself had walked down and placed them there, wearing flip-flops and carrying a bag of decorations like she was rehearsing for an event nobody invited me to. I didn't say anything. I just removed the items, stored them in my garage, and replaced the sign with a larger one. That's when she came back during daylight hours. Furious. And that was the moment with the sign, the one I'll never forget. The way she screamed "This belongs to the community," like she was claiming the land for a forgotten empire. The way she tossed my property marker into the lake like it was a personal insult to her daughter's Instagram photo dreams. And the way my neighbor across the lake peeked through his blinds, coffee mug in hand, probably calling his wife over like, "Honey, come see this HOA lady's finally lost her mind." I didn't rise from my chair. I didn't argue. I just let her perform. Because at that point, I knew something she didn't. I had everything on camera. Every word. Every false claim. Every violation. After she stormed off that day, soaked from lake spray and muttering curses under her breath, I sent an email. Not to her, but to the county zoning office. I asked for all parcel records, permits, dock registrations, and HOA boundary maps related to the area. And when they replied 2 days later with a zip folder confirming exactly what I already knew, that my dock was on private property with no public easement, I smiled. Because now I wasn't just some stubborn homeowner. I was a man with receipts. And Karen had no idea that her little party power trip was about to become the most entertaining disaster this lake community had ever seen. The next week was anything but peaceful. Every morning I'd wake up to something new left near the dock. One day it was a roll of pink streamers fluttering in the breeze, stuck to the dock's corner post with masking tape. Another day it was a folding table with a plastic tablecloth draped over it, weighted down by a stack of party cup. Someone was clearly rehearsing for an event that wasn't going to happen. I checked the camera footage each night before bed and sure enough, there she was. Karen, sometimes alone, sometimes with what looked like her niece or daughter, tiptoeing across my yard like a raccoon in yoga pants. She wasn't even subtle about it. I watched her try and hammer a metal stake into the dirt near the dock one night. The hammer hit her thumb and she yelped, dropping it into the lake. I laughed so hard I nearly spit out my tea. Still, I didn't confront her. I let it all build. Because the more she acted entitled, the stronger my case became. What really lit the fire under her heels was when she got wind of my zoning request. I don't know how she found out. Maybe someone at the county office mentioned it, or maybe she snooped my mailbox, but the next day she fired back hard. I found a new sign staked on my lawn, about 10 feet from the dock. It said "Future Site of HOA Community Events" in oversized block letters, as if just putting it there made it true. I pulled it up and tossed it in the garage next to the party cup. But that same evening, a different kind of attack started. Trash. Not a lot, just enough to send a message. Empty soda cans, snack wrappers, and once, a moldy bag of hot dog buns mysteriously appeared near my fence. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was doing it. The same cameras that captured Karen's sneaky party setup now recorded late-night visits from teenagers with hoodies and flashlights, clearly operating on someone's orders. The next night, I activated the motion-triggered sprinklers. They were originally intended to keep raccoons off my garden beds, but now they had a higher purpose. I adjusted their range to cover the dock entrance and part of the shoreline. When the sensor caught movement, they'd spray in a wide arc with a satisfying hiss that echoed over the lake. Sure enough, 2 nights later the show began. The cameras caught Karen creeping back down the path, just after midnight, holding what looked like a decorative wreath and a string of hanging lights. She didn't see the tiny blinking sensor on the post. The second she stepped onto the dock, a high-pressure blast of water hit her dead in the chest. She shrieked and spun like a ballerina on ice, dropping the decorations and flailing backwards straight into the shallow end of the lake. Her arms windmilled as she slipped and fell backward with a splash. The camera caught the exact moment her sunglasses flew off her head mid-scream. It was comedy gold. I didn't even have to confront her the next day. I just printed out a screenshot from the video, her mid-splash, arms in the air, mouth open, and taped it to my front door with a note that said "Trespassers get wet." The decorations were still floating near the dock when she came by in the morning, stomping toward my porch like a wet cat in sandals. She didn't even knock. She stood there, dripping with indignation, and shouted that I was using water as a weapon. I simply looked her dead in the eye and said you should be glad I didn't switch it to hot sauce. That shut her up for a few seconds. Then she ranted about legal actions and civil infractions and said she was calling someone with authority. Good, I said. Make sure they bring a towel. Later that afternoon, a man in a suit showed up in a beat-up sedan with a magnetic sticker on the side that read Neighborhood Legal Affairs. He stepped out holding a manila folder and introduced himself as Gerald Mayfield, legal counsel for the HOA. I recognized the last name immediately, Karen's. Cousin or brother, probably. He didn't look like any lawyer I'd ever met. His tie was crooked and his shoes were muddy like he'd walked through the woods instead of using a driveway. I offered him a seat and a lemonade, which he declined with a snort. Then he tried to hand me a letter stating that the dock must be made available for temporary community use or else I would be in violation of the HOA's Cooperative Spirit Clause. I took the letter, skimmed it, and nearly burst out laughing. Not a single legal reference. Not a single zoning citation. Just vague language about community values and goodwill obligations. I asked him plainly if he was a licensed attorney. He hesitated, then mumbled that he was acting in an advisory capacity. I told him the meeting was over. Before he left, I made sure to let the cameras pick up the whole exchange. His arrival, the fake document, even his muttering on the way out that Karen was making him do this. He didn't know he was being recorded. But by now that had become a running theme. I compiled the footage, added timestamps, and sent it to my real attorney along with a formal cease and desist letter. I also sent copies to the sheriff's office, the county code compliance office, and just for fun, to the HOA's official email address. The response came faster than I expected. A deputy showed up the next day, friendly and calm, asking for a quick statement. I showed him the footage and explained that I wasn't looking to press charges yet, but I wanted a record on file in case things escalated. It was around this time that Karen decided to double down. She started preparing as if nothing had happened. More decorations appeared by the lake entrance. A whiteboard with her daughter's name in glitter paint showed up hanging on a tree nearby. She even tried to tape balloons to my mailbox again. I removed them quietly, without a word. But I did something else too. I began preparing for the big day. Not the party. The showdown. I knew she wouldn't stop. I knew the party was going to happen whether I allowed it or not. So I began documenting everything down to the minute. Each new violation. Each trespassing attempt. Every petty act of sabotage. Because what Karen didn't know was that I wasn't just protecting my dock anymore. I was building a case so airtight she'd need a scuba tank to get out of it. The tension in the neighborhood was starting to ripple beyond just me and Karen. At first it was subtle. A neighbor on the corner stopped waving when I walked by. Another one began deliberately watering his lawn whenever I came down the road, facing away like I didn't exist. It wasn't hard to tell which ones had swallowed Karen's version of events. She had started circulating printed flyers accusing me of being anti-community and unneighborly, claiming that I was hoarding community access space, and that my refusal to cooperate was an attack on the spirit of the neighborhood. The flyer even had a picture of my dock with a fake HOA watermark on it and a caption that read, "Imagine this. For everyone." It would have been laughable if it wasn't so manipulative. What struck me most was the effort she was putting in, as if her daughter's party was some noble cause and I was a tyrant in flip-flops standing in the way of joy. Despite the subtle glares and muttered comments, I kept my cool. I knew the storm wasn't over. And I was right. Karen came back 3 days later with a clipboard and her fake lawyer cousin Gerald in tow. This time they were more aggressive. Gerald claimed that under Article 6, Section 4 of the HOA's Extended Use Clause, any area adjacent to community water could be considered communal if not explicitly gated or marked. I didn't laugh, though I wanted to. Instead, I invited both of them onto the porch and played a clip on my phone. It was Gerald himself, just a few days earlier, muttering into the camera that Karen made him do this and that he wasn't an actual lawyer. The look on his face was priceless. He went pale. Karen sputtered something about illegal recordings and slander. I calmly pointed to the sign just above the front door, which read, in simple black font, "Audio and video surveillance in use." Her face twisted, and without another word, they stormed off down the drive. I thought that would be the end of it, or at least slow her down. But the next morning, something new appeared on my dock. A bright red sign with gold glitter letters that read "Reserved for HOA event, June 3rd. She had drilled the sign into the dock itself using 2 long screws. I stared at it for a moment in disbelief, then walked back to the house and pulled out my phone. I didn't call Karen. I called my attorney. After that, I called the sheriff's office again and asked to update the ongoing record. Then I took photos, removed the sign, and placed it with the growing pile of her decorations that were now collecting in a corner of my garage. It was beginning to look like the clearance bin of a failing party store. Still, I knew something more had to be done. So I marked my calendar for the upcoming HOA meeting, open to all residents. It was held every month at the community clubhouse, and although I wasn't technically part of the HOA, state law allowed any homeowner within a certain proximity to attend when there were disputes about shared boundaries. I showed up 5 minutes early wearing a simple polo shirt and jeans, holding a flash drive and a rolled-up copy of the property deed in a cardboard tube. The room was filled with neatly dressed committee members, folding chairs, and Karen at the front like a queen presiding over a court. As soon as the floor opened for public comment, she took the microphone. She spoke with fake politeness, thanking everyone for attending and then launching into a 10-minute tirade about how community bonds were being undermined by selfish behavior. She didn't name me directly at first, but the glances toward me were obvious. Then she went further, accusing me of sabotaging her daughter's future memories and defying communal values. She even called me a lakefront squatter, which got a few murmurs from the crowd. I waited patiently, letting her dig deeper with every exaggerated claim. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up slowly and handed the flash drive to the volunteer managing the projector. Then I unrolled the deed and held it up. The screen lit up with still images first. Karen trespassing. Karen ripping down signs. Karen falling into the lake. Karen placing balloons on my dock in the dead of night. Then came the audio clip. Gerald admitting he wasn't a lawyer. Karen claiming my dock belonged to the community now. The room was silent except for the occasional uncomfortable cough. When the last clip finished playing, I stepped forward again. I explained, calmly and clearly, that I was not part of the HOA. That my property line, including the dock, was privately owned and legally recorded. That every action Karen had taken in the past month constituted trespassing, harassment, and public defamation. And that I had chosen not to press charges, yet. Then I handed printed copies of the zoning documents to the head of the board. They looked them over for less than a minute before nodding slowly. A man near the back stood up and said maybe we should rethink who's bringing drama to this neighborhood. A woman muttered something about always knowing Karen was out of control. The board member thanked me for presenting evidence and assured me that the matter would be reviewed immediately. Karen tried to speak again, but the room wasn't listening anymore. Her power had drained the moment the first image appeared on that screen. Her voice wavered. She accused me of faking the footage. Someone in the back laughed. The board told her they would discuss her conduct separately after the meeting. She stormed out of the room before it even ended. I stayed behind and answered questions from the board, calmly handing over anything they requested. It was over. Or at least, I thought it was. But the thing about people like Karen is they don't go down quietly. The more their control slips, the more desperate they get. And sure enough, the very next morning, I saw a van parked 2 houses down. Teens were unloading folding chairs, speakers, coolers, and tables. I walked over and asked one of them what they were doing. He shrugged and said they were hired for a birthday party setup near the lake. I didn't need to hear more. I walked back home, flipped on the dock cameras, and began setting up the next stage of defense. Because this wasn't just about a party anymore. It was about principle. And Karen was about to find out that when you push someone long enough, they stop pulling punches. June 3rd arrived with a warm breeze and a sky so perfectly clear it felt staged. I woke up earlier than usual, partly out of curiosity and partly because I knew it was the day Karen had been counting down to like it was the HOA Olympics. I made coffee, walked out to the dock, and stood there staring at the calm water, the same water she claimed gave her ownership of everything it touched. I had spent the past 3 days preparing, not for a party, but for a circus. The sprinklers had been recalibrated. The speakers were wired. The new signs had been printed and laminated. They read private property, no trespassing in bold, clean font, legally worded and clearly visible. But that wasn't all. I had installed a motion sensor near the dock's entrance, and connected it to a speaker system that would trigger a voice message recorded in a deep, booming tone, warning this area is under surveillance. Trespassers will be reported. All actions are being recorded. That message alone would probably send most people packing. But I knew Karen wasn't most people. By 10 a.m., I saw the first car pull up 2 houses down. Then another. And another. A caravan of minivans, SUVs with balloons tied to the mirrors, and a delivery van with folding chairs and a massive birthday cake. I leaned on my porch railing and sipped my coffee like I was watching a parade roll into enemy territory. Karen emerged from the chaos wearing a white sun hat, floral dress, and a look of manic satisfaction. She barked orders at the event crew, pointed toward the dock, and even had the audacity to wave at me with the smug confidence of a villain in a low-budget movie. By noon, music started playing from the backyard of the rental house where the party was staging. Children were running around with party hats, and a photographer arrived to set up shots. That's when Karen, clipboard in hand, began marching toward my property. I could see the teenage helpers trailing behind her with folding tables and drink dispensers, looking confused and hesitant. As soon as Karen reached the beginning of the dock, the motion sensor activated. The booming voice echoed over the lake, stopping her in her tracks. Warning: this area is under surveillance. Trespassers will be reported. All actions are being recorded. The teens froze. Karen, however, squared her shoulders like she was walking into a courtroom and waved them forward. They didn't move. One of the boys asked if she was sure they had permission. She turned to them, face tight with rage, and snapped, "Of course I have permission. It's community property. Just go." That's when the sprinklers activated. A sharp hiss and then a blast of cold water sprayed across the dock entrance, soaking the grass and the edge of Karen's dress. She shrieked and jumped back, flailing her arms and shouting about lawsuit. The teens began backing away quickly. 2 of them dropped the folding tables and bolted. Karen turned and screamed at them, calling them ungrateful and useless. Meanwhile, the neighbors were beginning to gather, some on porches, some peeking from behind curtains. It was like the entire block was holding its breath to see how far she'd go. Right on cue, the sheriff's deputy arrived. I had called earlier that morning and asked for a unit to swing by just in case things got out of hand. Deputy Harris stepped out of the patrol car, calm and familiar with the situation, having already been briefed in previous week. He approached Karen as she was trying to reset her soggy clipboard. She immediately launched into a tirade about me violating her rights, assaulting her with weaponized water, and destroying her daughter's birthday. Harris let her talk. Then he turned to me. I showed him the boundary markers, the deed copy, and the live feed from the motion camera. Everything was legal. Everything had been documented. He nodded, then turned back to Karen and issued a formal warning. Any further attempts to enter my property would result in a citation and possible misdemeanor trespassing charges. Karen looked stunned, as if the idea of facing actual consequences hadn't even crossed her mind until now. Her daughter, who had just walked over with a pink tiara on her head and a glittery gift bag in hand, stood watching the entire exchange. When the deputy finished his warning, the girl burst into tears, shouting that her party was ruined. Karen tried to console her, but the girl shrugged her off and stormed back toward the staging area, tossing the tiara into a bush as she went. The photographer, realizing the event was imploding, began quietly packing up his gear. A few parents started collecting their kids and leaving. One even came over to me privately and apologized, saying they had no idea it wasn't a real HOA-approved event. Karen stood at the edge of the dock, soaked, humiliated, and surrounded by melting balloons and deflating pride. For a long moment, she didn't say a word. Then she slowly turned and walked back toward her rental house, her shoes squishing with every step. The DJ, who had just started queuing up a track, looked at her for instructions. She didn't say anything, just waved her hand in a weak, dismissive gesture. The music stopped. The kids went quiet, and the silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had heard in weeks. I stayed on the porch as the cleanup began. Karen sat under a canopy, arms crossed, glaring across the lawn like a dictator who'd lost her kingdom. At one point, she caught my eye and mouthed something I couldn't quite read. Probably a curse or a threat or a promise to make my life harder. I didn't care. The damage was done. Not to me. To her. The very people she tried to rally had seen her collapse under her own delusion. And they wouldn't forget it. As the last vehicle drove off and the last soggy decoration was thrown into a trash bag, I walked down to the dock. The grass was a little muddy, but nothing permanent. I adjusted one of the sprinkler heads and gave the solar lights a quick wipe. Then I sat at the end of the dock, let my feet dangle over the water, and took a deep breath. The lake was quiet again. The chaos had passed. For now. What Karen didn't know was that the fallout was just beginning. She had broken more than boundaries. She had misused HOA resources, involved minors in illegal activities, and impersonated legal authority. I had it all on file, and while I hadn't pressed charges yet, the moment she tried anything again, I would. Because I was done playing defense. From now on, every stunt she pulled would be met with something stronger. Something she couldn't argue or out-yell. Something permanent. She had tried to throw a party on my dock. Instead, she'd just thrown away her reputation. The days following the failed party were strangely quiet. No more flyers. No more lawn chairs sneakily appearing near my dock. No more decorations or late-night balloon setup. Karen had gone radio silent. At first, I thought she might be planning another stunt, something even bigger, something sneakier. But nothing happened. It was as if the meltdown at the dock had knocked the wind out of her completely. I kept my cameras running, of course. I wasn't about to assume peace had arrived permanently, but after a week passed with nothing more than the usual sounds of sprinklers, birds, and boat motors in the distance, I realized something had shifted. The neighborhood had seen her unmask herself, and it left a mark. Then, on a quiet Monday morning, a large envelope arrived at my mailbox. No return address, but it was stamped with the seal of the local zoning office. Inside was a letter confirming the final outcome of their investigation into the complaints Karen had filed about my dock. It included a full summary of findings, a copy of the land plot clearly showing my private boundaries, and a notarized document stating that the dock was lawfully built and maintained, not subject to any HOA interference. At the bottom was a highlighted statement noting that further harassment regarding property access could result in civil penalties for any party attempting to interfere. It was official now. Not just by law, but by record. Karen couldn't spin this into a gray area anymore. That same afternoon, I saw her. She wasn't striding down the street or issuing demands like usual. She was walking along the far edge of the lake, dragging a single kayak behind her, trying to navigate through the reeds and rocks with an awkward paddle in one hand. She looked tired, sunburnt, and defeated. I watched from a distance as she slipped once, her foot catching on a submerged branch, sending her stumbling. She yelled something no one could hear and sat down hard on a rock, clutching her ankle. I didn't go to help. Part of me felt like I should, but the other part remembered every smirk, every lie, every attempt to take what wasn't hers. She was capable of walking back. She didn't need saving. She needed consequences. That evening, as I was locking up the shed, one of the board members from the HOA stopped by. A woman named Valerie, who had been present at the infamous meeting, introduced herself and asked if we could chat. I invited her up to the porch and handed her a glass of iced tea. She didn't waste time. She told me that in the wake of Karen's actions, several board members had begun auditing expenditures and reviewing decisions she had made in the last year. What they found wasn't just embarrassing, it was illegal. Karen had used HOA funds to print party flyers, hire decorators, and even pay her cousin Gerald a legal consultation fee under the table. Multiple complaints had come in, not just from me but from others she had bullied in the past. Valerie said it was likely Karen would be removed as president and possibly face charges depending on how the financial records shook out. I nodded and thanked her for the update. Then I handed her a flash drive with a neatly organized folder titled Karen Evidence. The following week, the HOA held an emergency vote. Karen wasn't just removed. She was barred from holding any future leadership position within the association. Gerald disappeared from the neighborhood altogether. No more beat-up sedan parked crooked in front of Karen's house. Word was that he had been fined for impersonating legal counsel and quietly ducked out to avoid further legal trouble. The new board president, Valerie, sent me a handwritten letter along with a gift basket. The letter read, "Thank you for standing up when we didn't know how." The basket was full of snacks, sparkling water, and a gift card to the local fishing supply store. It wasn't necessary, but it was appreciated. I decided to use that gift card. I bought some new dock chairs, a small umbrella for shade, and even a floating planter for flowers along the edge of the water. I installed a small wooden plaque that read Karen Free Zone and anchored it right beside the dock entrance. It became a bit of a running joke in the neighborhood. People would walk by, smile, and ask if they could enter the zone without getting soaked. I told them as long as they weren't dragging party balloons behind them, they were welcome to wave from the shore. A few even brought over drinks or asked about the sprinkler system, joking about installing their own. One Saturday, a local news team showed up. Apparently, someone had uploaded footage of Karen's lake meltdown and it had gone mildly viral. Not millions of views, but enough that a human interest reporter thought it would make a great story about neighbor boundaries, private property, and standing your ground without losing your mind. The interview was lighthearted. I answered questions, smiled for the camera, and even reenacted my sprinkler switch motion as a joke. When asked if I'd ever let Karen throw a party on my dock, I smiled and said, "Sure. As long as it's in the middle of the lake with no guests and no dock." The clip aired the next night and several neighbors brought over popcorn to watch. Karen didn't show her face for days. Eventually, she sold the house. Quietly. No for sale sign, just a moving truck one morning and a few hours of cardboard boxes being packed into the back of it. I watched from my kitchen window as she stood one last time by the edge of her yard, looking across at my dock. She didn't yell. She didn't wave. She just turned and got into the passenger seat. The truck pulled away slowly, like even it didn't want to be rushed out of the shame it was carrying. That evening, the lake was quieter than it had been in months. No music, no shouting, just the sounds of birds and the water lapping against the dock. I sat out there until the sun went down, watching the reflection shimmer and ripple in the orange light. The sprinklers were off. The warning speaker was unplugged. The sign still stood, but more as a memory than a deterrent. Peace, the kind I came out here for, had finally returned. And it hadn't come through shouting or arguing or threats. It came through patience, persistence, and a mountain of documented proof. Karen had tried to take over something that wasn't hers. She had bullied, lied, and screamed. But in the end, she left in silence. and that silence was the loudest victory I could have ever hoped for.